You're listening to The Disabled Employee, a lived experience podcast where young disabled people share their experiences with the workforce. All right, so welcome to episode 1, where we talk about what the disabled job seeking experience is like. My name is Dureece. I'm 25 years old. I live in Melbourne and I live with a dissociative condition called DPDR.
Hi, my name's Britt. I have she, her pronouns. I live in Tasmania. I'm a full-time wheelchair user and I have severe ADHD.
Hi guys, my name is Tan. I use she, they pronouns. I'm 20 years old and I live in Victoria. I have a full vision impairment, so I'm totally blind with no light perception. And I'm really excited to start this podcast and see where we go with it and to talk about our experiences.
All right, so starting off, the first kind of question, talking point is, how does being disabled affect your job seeking experience?
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I have a quite noticeable disability. I have a very visible disability, and so because of that, it actually impacts my job seeking a lot. And my disability impacts my day-to-day function. And so because of that, I have to really keep in mind my limits. So walking in at the beginning of my job seeking journey, I had to really almost plan out what I knew would be realistic for my disability and my own capabilities. Hey, I'm never gonna, fly a plane unless artificial intelligence gets real good. So, but hey, if I can use Microsoft Word, I have great verbal written communication skills. And so I have my skills, but I also have my limitations because of my disability that I need to keep in mind. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Brett.
Well, like you, my disability is pretty out there. You see a 200-kilo wheelchair coming, and I've got low muscle. Oh my God. You hear it though.
Well, I'll hear it
though. But yeah, it's pretty noticeable, is what I was trying to say. And I have low muscle tone as well, so I can't lift heavy objects. So like you, I had to be pretty selective in my job dreams, I suppose. I remember being at 5 years old, I wanted to be a vet, and then realized I couldn't put the animals onto the table if I needed to. So I'm like, oh, kind of gotta adjust that dream. When I was 4, I wanted to be a jockey. My therapist were like, no, Brett, please don't. So things like that, it definitely does affect not only what you want to be, but then when you're trying to get in the door, it affects how people are going to perceive you. And then on top of that, I'm only late diagnosed ADHD in the last 2 years. But because my physical disability is so out there, it kind of overrides the ADHD. They don't see it as much and they only focus on the physical disability rather than focusing on like my cognitive needs as well to help me maintain the job. But I'm also working that out for myself too.
I've noticed that quite a lot, actually, when you live with that double of, having a visible and an invisible disability, they completely ignore the second one.
It's almost as if you have to you have to defend the fact that your invisible disability is valid. So it's kind of like a two-parter. One, we can't see it, so it's almost like it's discarded. But then also two, then you have to go into the actual direct, this is what I need advocacy.
Right. And I think that's a pretty good segue into me bringing up what my experience is like. So broadly speaking, I'm very detached from the present. I sort of swim in and out of consciousness. When I was younger, I used to have like blackouts and stuff. It can affect my memory, learning capacity, things like that. I'd often, in a lot of jobs or job interviews or job searching, or just in just daily life, people often say, it doesn't look like there's anything particularly wrong with you. Like, you don't look like you're zoned out. And I'm like, well, that's definitely what I'm experiencing. And so, like, I've even had people say, oh, like, is there actually anything, like, are you faking this? Are you putting this on? I'm like, no. And that makes it pretty hard when I'm trying to describe, like, for example, with a job service provider, one of those, like Centrelink or something. We're like, okay, you got to look for this many jobs per week and you can do this, this, and this. I'm like, no, trust me, I can't do that because of my symptoms. And they're like, oh, what are you you talking about? You're
Mm.
fine. You can manage this. I'm like, no, trust me. Like, I'll be in that job for like a week and then I'll get fired.
I almost have the opposite in my experience because
Oh,
yeah, because I have such a visible disability, and I guess Britt, you're the happy medium between us. But because of that, people expect so much less from me. So there's
Hmm.
because they instantly see the disability, and because I look so not like so different because it's just, the disability's there. I'm holding a white cane. There are a lot of interviews that I've been in where they're instantly like, no, you can't do this. Or,
Hmm.
are you sure you'll be able to do this? Are you capable of this? How will you do it? We don't know how you're going to do it, so we're not entirely sure if you'll be able to. And it's purely because of what they look at, right? And it's because they know, oh, blind, and they make all of these assumptions. And I guess it brings this whole kind of contrast of invisible disability, what you've just mentioned, Doris, of having having that almost like overestimation, kind of be like, oh, it's not real because we can't see it, as opposed to, oh, we can see it, so we're terrified to
right.
Yeah.
work with it.
What I think's funny is what we're seeing in both our different experiences, like although they're on very different extremes, is someone making assumptions for you about what you
Exactly.
can or can't do based on your disability. And I think that's like a major problem. Not even just in job searching, just I think the disabled experience in general of having everyone else like assume or decide what you can or can't do is quite present.
I definitely agree with that. But I get both sides of the coin. So
Mm,
with my physical disability, people are really quick to either be like, "Oh, you can't do this." I remember I told you guys this story before. I remember applying for my first job.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
uh,
Yes.
I wanted to work at my local lolly shop with all my friends that were working at the local lolly shop. And I went
So
in and
cute.
my carer, well, it wasn't even my carer, it was my brother's carer, was like, oh, Britt, they're hiring 14 to 15-year-olds. You should like apply. I'm like, oh, I won't apply. They're like, why not? Brittany, apply. I'm like, okay, I'll apply. So I went up to the lady and I was like, hey, I would really like to put my resume in. She's like, honey, can you skip an ice cream? I'm like, I don't know. I've never tried.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Like,
real.
and she's
honey,
like, well,
ugh.
Can you do something you've never tried before?
I'm like, I'll give it a shot. And she's like, no, we need our girls to skip an ice cream. I don't think it's worth you putting your resume in.
Instant dismissal. Like, what is
Mm,
that?
And then my carer was like, I am so sorry. That
yeah,
was a huge crushing thing. And
Yeah.
I went home and I tried to skip an ice cream, and guess what? I could.
yeah.
But
Well, there you go.
I know. Crazy. But I guess it's also then really walking in, having a plan, because ultimately, like, yeah, we've had these experiences, and it's awful that we have to encounter them. And inevitably, with a disability, invisible or visible, there will be some pushback. At some point, if you are job seeking and you do attend a lot of interviews, it's going to be inevitable. It is not insurmountable. There are things you can do. I write things down a lot. I love writing things out. And so I've written down things that I need, that I know in terms of I have these skills. So for me, obviously, computer literacy, verbal written communication. I'm good at admin work. I'm good at organization. There are things that I know I'm definitely capable of doing. There are things that I need that are my limitations, right? So I can't ever work with photos really. My disability limits me from working with visual things. I need public transport near me so that I can easily access it because I can't drive because artificial intelligence hasn't gotten there yet. How dare they? Coming in with a list of your limitations, sure, but identifying the skills that you have, and it can be so basic. It can be something as little as you can do quick math, because that goes a long way. You have people skills, you're charismatic. Having Riz goes so far, guys. Like, have
It
Riz.
totally does.
It does. And so I think that's what I do. And I also sometimes I plan out kind of, okay, what could they ask? I've had people ask like, how do I get to work? And so I know that question is coming in my interview. If they decide to be ableist that day, it'll be how are you going to actually get here? And I know I have an answer prepared in my brain, even if it's just a kind of rough answer, basically being like, well, I have an orientation specialist who teaches me the routes to get from A to B. And so, I spend a few hours learning the route, I'll be able to get here. And so it's almost, yeah, it sucks that you have to do that, and there is a lot of advocacy that comes in. But if you go in with a plan and you almost half plan for what they might ask you in terms of your disability specifically, it helps a lot. And having that list of your skills and having that list of your limitations or your accommodations, it helps to really define what you're actually advocating for when you're in that job seeking process, as opposed to going in and having people be ableist and you're almost gaslit into thinking that you can't do things that you definitely can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything you just said is incredible. That's all really good advice. And I like the specifically where you said it's inevitable but not insurmountable. I think that's something everyone should live by. I've gone into job interviews where I'm just upfront when they ask you, oh, what are your shortcomings? What are your biggest weaknesses? And I'll tell them like, oh, so I've got a mental slash cognitive slash sensory disability. It's a or whatever terminology I use at the time. And I immediately see their face drop. And I'm like, well, I need to be upfront with them about what my limitations are and what my strengths are so they don't get any surprises on the job. Because I've tried keeping it to myself before, and then 2 weeks in, they're like, "Oh, hey, I've noticed that you struggle with some things. Why didn't you tell us about this?" And I'm like, "Oh, shit,"
Mm.
and that's very poorly received. So I just tell them up front. I'm like, "Hey, but with a little bit of accommodation here, a little, wiggle room there, or." I've even told them, hey, it's actually not going to get in the way because I've prepared, like I know what my skills are. I know where my disability will get in the way, and it's not in this job. But they just hear the word disability and like, I don't know.
Instantly disability is a no.
Um, so that's why I
Mm.
I often say like my condition rather than my disability. It just gets through so many more doors. I do wish I'd sort of thought about what you said before, Tan, like, preparing for ableism because it always takes me off guard. Um,
And it's
and
not
I
always
sort of,
ableism too, though. Sometimes it's just valid caution,
hmm,
which sucks because you have to really differentiate between when they're dismissing your disability and when they're actually open but unsure.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
I wouldn't be defensive straight away. I definitely would just prepare though and be ready to I guess field those questions when they come your way. Um,
I can
and
definitely
yeah,
feel a bit of a difference though when someone's just like
you
thinking
know,
pragmatically, like
oh,
oh,
you
like
know.
in the same in the same sense that like if I say, oh, I'm not very experienced with making coffee, and they're like, really? That could be a problem. But like they're not being a dick about it. But
Mm,
you can sort of, I don't know, you can sort of feel it when it's like, oh, disability. I don't know. For me personally, I can kind of feel the difference in sort of how they speak about it. But no, I think what you said is really important. I wish I'd gone in a little more sort of keeping that in mind so I can sort of guard myself beforehand. Because often I'll walk out of those types of interviews where it goes wrong the second I bring up my needs, and it sort of discourages me from looking for work. I'm like,
oh
it,
God,
it's
yes.
like it's not even a question of I don't think I can do this so much as I don't think people are going to listen to me.
Yeah.
Um,
'Cause you've got to remember that these interviews, when you're going into the workforce, some of the things that the advice that was given to me is that you're not just being interviewed, you're interviewing your employer too. So you've got
right.
to have those questions ready. Like, how are you going to support me if I am in this position? If I'm in this position, what are you going to provide me to be able to help me work for you?
That's a great question
Uh,
to ask. I think that
yeah.
also comes alongside when you do plan these things out. And listeners, please, please plan them out. Um, Look at the job description first. I mean, it's overwhelming to kind of know where to even get started with planning your, okay, what are my skills? What are my limitations? In especially in employment, which is a whole freaking ball field in itself. Find a job. Like find a job posting, look at the job description, scroll through it, and go, can I do this? Can I do this? Not sure if I can do this. Should I ask about this? What are the specific parameters of this? Because they will have roles. The
Mhm.
job description has an outline. It says this is what a company is, this is what the role entails, this is what skills you need, this is what qualifications you need. And you need to ask yourself if that actually applies to you, if it doesn't, and why it doesn't. Does it not apply for you because you're disabled, or does it not apply to you because you haven't actually developed the skill yet? Because that's what you're going to walk into the interview and that's what they're going to ask you about. And that's what you're basically going to need to defend if you're not sure about whether or not you can actually do the skill or not.
I think people get a bit intimidated by the idea of having to like fight for yourself or being on the receiving end, like someone's like getting defensive. But it's like, no, I think
Yeah.
advocacy
You
can be
don't need to
like a
have a TED
really
talk, guys.
yeah, like advocacy can be a really chill thing. Like when I'm telling someone about when like advocating for myself, telling them about my needs, like, oh, don't worry, I have the capacity to do that thing. If I need help, I'll call. That's not me having a go at someone. That's me just like reminding them of like the realities of my condition. And I think advocacy doesn't always need to be like a big intense. It's not like a war campaign. It's like
It's small things.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can self-advocate in a job interview in a way that's not hostile so much as just like kindly assertive.
Well, that's the thing. That's what advocating is, setting your boundaries and being a little bit assertive. I'm co-designing something at the moment that helps with this for young people with disability to identify their strengths, their values, their interests, but also identify their support needs. So when they go into a new space, you're laying it all out on the table for the employer. That really helps because it helps for those that aren't ableist and are just being a little bit cautious. It gives them that sense of relief of, okay, this person knows what they need. They know how to do it. And they've given me the tool list on how to help them succeed in my workplace. And that's what advocating is. It's putting those things down that you need and that are like legal accessible accommodations that they have to provide.
I'm curious to know what you would have wanted to know when you first started your job seeking journey, because mine was definitely like, I wish I'd known to prepare for all of these things. Because I walked into my first job interview, man, it sucked. It was just pure ableism, and I wasn't ready. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what my skills were, and so I was underselling myself, and it was awful. But I've learned that since. Yeah, I'm super curious to know what you would have wanted to know.
I wish I would have known I didn't have to push myself as far as I did before I basically got to the breaking point of actually asking for what I thought were tiny little accommodations, but really they make my workplace a lot better and a lot more accessible. I wish that I knew that I could do a lot more and ask for a lot more, and that it was actually their legal obligation to provide me that. And I wish that I knew more about my rights in the workplace rather than just trying to prove my capabilities when I really didn't have to because they hired me for a reason.
Basically, you are a capable worker. Do not underestimate yourself just because you think you have a disability. You are a capable worker who can work and do things.
And you should be paid at least the same rate as everybody else.
Yes, get paid. You have rights.
Yeah.
You have money.
I think everyone needs to remember is like this doesn't even just apply to disabled people, but I think it can hit a little bit harder when you're disabled, is that when you get turned down or, someone casts doubt on you and you just feel that, rejection of what your abilities may or may not be, it sort of gets to your self-esteem, and it's just like, no, it was just a shitty job interview. That's fine. I can do stuff and I'm happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've talked a lot about, how to prepare ourselves for job seeking and job interviews and all the steps we can take to make the process easier for ourselves. But I think a very universal disabled experience is always having to pretty much do all the work. Like we have to make it easier for other people to accommodate us. We rarely see, well, not often enough do we see the world accommodating us as much as they could. How do we feel that society in general could make the job seeking experience for disabled people? Like this could be employers, this could be government intervention, industry standards, whatever. How do we see that being improved?
I'll start with a really tiny, tiny, tiny thing, and I've seen it, and does it make me feel good. When you actually write in your job description that you welcome applications from people with disabilities or from diverse backgrounds, and you can put it in as a feel-good thing, you do that, but just know we're reading that. And I will be applying if you write that, because that means you're willing to make those accommodations. You're open to them. And in this ableist society, which I want to say it helps to have that indication of, hey, we're willing to make those accommodations. That actually eases my anxiety a little bit, because it means I'm not hyper prepared for an interview where I might have to go in and deal with direct discrimination.
or even like remote work is available for those with chronic fatigue or people like me that are in a lot of pain every day, being able to work from home. COVID opened up so much opportunities for me because it suddenly became a good thing to work at home.
Yeah, true.
So, like that made everything way more accessible because I have my setup at home.
And I think every disabled job seeker who's really like dug into job seeking has a story about a job agency, an employment agency, right? Man, they're awful. And
Mm.
if they could just be a little bit better, if they could just be structured better, you have contact, you have someone who is able to sit down and step through everything with you and makes you feel empowered, someone who can seek out jobs and help you support you to seek out jobs that are to your interests within your capabilities and isn't just like, hey, go work at Coles, bro. That I think that would be a major benefit. But Doris, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I also think that the job service provider, the employment service provider system, it's horribly broken. I have so many issues with it, but that's another chat. But no, I really do think that you should be able to flag if you do have a disability or some kind of persisting health issue that will affect what types of work you can do. You should be able to flag that, and you should be assigned a job service provider that knows how to navigate that, rather than someone who's disinterested and basically just palms you off onto the same, conveyor belt, so to speak, as everyone else. Just like, nah, just
Mm.
apply for all this stuff. I'm not listening to you. Because yeah, like the fact is the majority of people who are disabled and would really benefit from like a pension or something don't get on it. And they're stuck on things like job seeker, and then they're forced into applying for jobs that they know aren't going to be a good environment for them or that they don't have the capacity for. And then they'll have that job service provider complain when they end up quitting the job 2 weeks in, or they get fired 2 weeks in, like, oh, why didn't you do it right? No, but for me, I really just think a big thing for me would be when you have a job that you know that you have the capacity for, and you've disclosed that you have a disability, and they're just like, are you sure that you're going to be able to do this? I'd love some way to be able to demonstrate that. Like if they're saying, well, we can't just take your word on it, dude, just give me a chance to come in for like an afternoon and
A
show
training
you that I can do.
shift.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
training shift. Like, I know there's a lot of legal and ethical qualms about like trials, especially in hospitality, where they basically just get you to do free work for a day. I'd love the chance to be able to demonstrate to them. It reminds me of something. I was trying to bring this up before. It's called the curb cut effect. Um, so it describes when accommodations that are made for the disabled community, by extension, benefit everyone else in the world as well. And it's named after, you know how sidewalks, they have that little ramp dip at the end.
Not enough of them.
Yeah, well, but those little dips that are attached to concrete sidewalks, that was originally created for people using wheelchairs, and a lot of people are like, nah, it's not really worth it. It's a waste of money. But then people who are using prams and strollers, people who are using bikes and scooters, people who are carrying heavy stuff, people pushing a trolley with the shopping, were all also benefiting from it as well. So I think, yeah, it's like, well, hey, look, this would benefit a lot of people, but in particular, I would like to be able to prove that I can do something. Like I've had that even, applying for share houses and stuff. Like, are you actually able to like clean stuff, or are you just gonna like not do it? And I'm like, no, I can do it. Just do you want me to wash some dishes?
Yeah, I think
Um,
just literally, and training shifts do exist. And even if it's just, okay, like maybe not even a training shift, maybe a shadow shift, like you just follow someone around and they just do the thing. And so the person's not really working, but they're able to at least look at things and be like, oh, I'm going to need support with this. Or like,
mm,
I can definitely 100% do that.
yeah,
Right? Like having that is really useful. And people, like companies do that, but some companies, a lot of companies don't. And you're right. Like it's so useful to kind of be like, here, like, here's me, here's evidence. You need evidence? Here is evidence that I am capable of doing this.
yeah. Because even if they're not ableist, they're just like, oh, I just want to make sure that we're
They're
running a
worried.
good ship. And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But don't let the fact that I'm disabled make you more cautious than you need to be. Um,
Yeah, I think assumptions
and
are the bane of our existences
yeah,
in jobs. So if just employers could just not make assumptions off rip, that's kind
Don't
of
over don't overestimate or underestimate us.
I think
yeah,
that's
just
half the issues I've experienced as a disabled person revolve around people assuming something about me.
We'll wrap up after
The
this.
final thing that I'm going to say is that if you're an employer and you have a job interview with a disabled person and you sort of groan at the idea of having to make accommodations for them, like, it's going to be a bit of extra work, it's going to be a bit of extra resources or time, just think about the net positive. Like, yeah, maybe you have to invest a little bit more time or effort into this person, but think of the net positive that having them there will bring.
Yeah, you have someone
Um,
who cares about the job. Would you rather have someone who is disabled and able to do the job with a few adjustments, doing the job, and they really do care about it, or would you rather have someone who does not care and
And
is technically able to do the job with no adjustments, but is not?
yeah, because that puts you at
it
an
has,
actual deficit.
Yeah,
like, even making small accommodations for people with disabilities, there are so many organizations out there that will fund those accommodations for your workplace.
and it only takes a Google to look up those organizations. It's not just your company and it's the first time anyone has ever dealt with this disability in a job seeking scenario. Like, no.
And it adds value to your employee to know that you care enough to make those accommodations. Therefore, they're going to put 1,000% into their work because you've done that for them and you've shown them that you're in a supportive environment, and it adds to your organizational culture.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like the thing. It's like when I work at a place where I get treated like they care about what I make, I put in so much more effort because I'm like,
Exactly.
oh, well, I'm being, like, especially if I'm paid proportionately to my effort, I'm like, oh, well, dude, I'm gonna give it my all. You're gonna get a good product from me.
I would kind of whip it around the other way as well and say, hey, if you're an employee and you have a disability, there are organizations that will help you. You don't have to be alone in understanding what your rights are, understanding what your accommodations might be, understanding what your skills are, trying to upskill, trying to get training. There are organizations out there. If you have a disability, have a Google, have a look at, disability organizations or like Centrelink or just upskilling training programs, maybe a support worker, maybe a family member, a friend that can help you to understand what you need or I guess support you in your job seeking journey. You don't have to do this by yourself, especially if you have a disability. That stuff is hard. That's what I'm saying. That stuff is hard and you don't have to do it by yourself. And don't be afraid of asking for help for that if you just because you have a disability. Because I promise you, so many people who are able-bodied go to those organizations and go to, family or friends or parents or whatever, and they ask for help. Just in general, just for job seeking.
All right, so that about wraps it up for today's episode. In the next episode, we'll be talking about what happens when you get a job and some of the issues and possible solutions for things that happen on site. And anyway, thanks for listening, guys. I'm Dureece, and it's been a pleasure.
I'm Ton. Thanks for listening.
I'm Britt. Thanks for listening to us ramble.
This podcast was brought to you by the Dream Network, a program that bridges the gap between disabled job seekers and employers and aims to help disabled youth build the skills and confidence they need to enter the workforce. The Dream Network is a program run by Children and Young People with Disability Australia, also known as CYDA.